It's Tuesday, August 27th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. But before we do that, I do just want to address the last few weeks on the show here. I have been missing episodes. A lot of people have noticed. I'm sure I posted about the situation on social media, but if you're not on Twitter, if you're not on Instagram, anything like that, I just wanted to talk about it here on the podcast really quick. My mother-in-law, Sylvia Duca, passed away last week. And, this is something we've known about for a long time. My wife and I, my mother-in-law had cancer. She fought cancer for 20 years. I would be remiss in calling her anything other than the bravest and toughest fighter that I know. And so again, we found out that she was going to be needed to move to hospice care early in August. I flew from the Fantasy Football Expo, flew home, and immediately came out to LA to be with my family out here to be with my wife, who got here a couple days before me. And we've just been going through that situation. It was couldn't be a better end of life situation for my mother-in-law. Obviously it's a horrible thing, but shout out to the great folks at Caring House in Torrance, who took such great care of her, who took such great care of us in her final few days here. So that's just been why I've been out. And I felt it was important to share that with the audience because, you guys hold space for me, in life, in this crazy career that I get to have. And I think it's important to be honest. I think it's important to kind of share what's been going on here, not make it anything mysterious. And like I said, I've been transparent and open about it on social media. The support from people on social media and followers and listeners and fans of the show and fans of my work has been nothing short of incredible. So my wife and I are just so thankful to people for the support, both at the GoFundMe that we posted for Sylvia to support her end of life care and be able to give her the best care possible after a 20-year fight with cancer. And I couldn't be more thankful to the people who have supported that, but any sort of level of support, people have reached out and been kind. It's been very moving. I'll just put it at that. And for this show, I also want to just say thank you to all of you who showed me grace and patience throughout this and not being here during what I know is a super important time of year. You guys being patient with me, the listeners being patient with me I'm very, very thankful for it. And, family comes first. It wasn't a choice, right? To take time away from the show. This was what needed to happen. It was what would have happened no matter what, but still people being understanding, it does mean a lot. And I also want to thank all of my coworkers here, co-hosts of the show, for stepping in for me at a moment's notice. Having that flexibility and being, Andy, Scott, Dalton, Tara, everybody who stepped in on the show the last few weeks has been, I'm very, very thankful for them. And I hope they know how much that means to me. I'm also thankful to the production staff here on the show, Colin Brennan, Brett Rader, stepping up to move things around for me, to my bosses, Jason Klobaka, the executives here at Yahoo. Everybody's been nothing short of incredible and supportive. And I really appreciate that because my focus the last few weeks has been on my wife and on my mother-in-law. And I'm very, very happy that we were able to give her the end of life experience that she deserves and that we were all able to be there. And I was able to be there for my wife. On that note, we'll get into the rest of the show, but just programming note, I'm going to be on this show. I will miss tomorrow's show. Scott and Dalton's they're going to handle that while my wife and I fly back home to Virginia Beach. And then going forward, Wednesday on, I'll be on every show in the host chair as scheduled. So just had to say that, had to get that out for you guys. But like I said, it's still a hell of a day to talk ball. Let's get into it. We have a great guest in Dwain McFarland. Let's throw it to him. Joining me now is, I'm going to say, my good buddy, Dwain McFarland from Fantasy Life. Dwain, what's going on, man?
What is up, Mr. Harmon? Man, anytime if I can be called a good buddy by you, I will take it. You've got really good musical taste, which goes a long way with me. I know I sent you a guy, Taylor McCall, over the offseason. I get to go see him tomorrow night. So I'm super excited. You seen anybody good lately?
No, I haven't. Actually, yeah, man, it's been a light summer of concerts for me. Honestly, I think the last show I went to was at Super Bowl Media Week. I saw Zach Bryan. I think you texted me about this. I saw Zach Bryan. That was the last show I went to, which again, I will say, shout out to Zach Bryan. I've been to many of Corpo, I'm not going to say who the product was because they're not paying us to say it. I've been to many a Corpo concerts and Corpo events. I've never seen an artist shell out, go absolutely ham, like play an encore and do a cover of a Toby Keith song because he had passed away that week. So, I mean, yeah, shout out to Zach Bryan. But that's the last show I saw, and that was in February. So it was a light summer of concerts for you, boy, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, you'll get back at it. I got to do Isbell, so that was exciting. But I know that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk some football, so we can jump in.
I think it would have been a more pleasant conversation had we talked about music for the next hour. But alas, yes, it is down to business, baby, because, Dwain, it is Cram Week on the podcast here in August. This is when a lot of the normal, well-adjusted, truly healthy folks are, getting back into football, right? They haven't been just living and dying by our content all off season. They're cramming for their most important drafts this week. And that is what we're doing on the pod this week. It's all about Cram Week. And today we're going to try to focus on what you guys need to know from the preseason, like what happened. And we're going to really try to focus on guys who have maybe changed our mind a little bit, or maybe moved sort of our priors based on their usage, performance, deployment. And again, really re-examine those original stances. And I could think of nobody better to have on this podcast, Dwain, than you, because this is your bread and butter, man. Like, you've made your name famous, and I'm going to say famous, in the industry because of your utilization report, which is currently every week on Fantasy Life. And you have an article up right now, your biggest takeaways from preseason utilization kind of overall, but specifically focusing on the most important games. So that's what we're going to dive into today, because, I've not been fully diving into the preseason. So you're going to help me a lot, honestly, do a little catch up here. So, but before we do that, I do just kind of want to ask you general philosophy question. How do we approach preseason utilization? What mistakes do we make, and sort of just kind of give us the overall rundown of how we do this thing?
For sure. Number one, it's just another data point in the puzzle, right? That we're trying to put everything together. So you start off in the off season. We care a lot about, money talks. So how teams spend their money, how they use their draft capital. That really sends us the first clear, kind of transmission of a signal, right? That we get. Then we start hearing from the coaches. You start getting install, and you're like, okay, this is kind of nice, but you're following along. You're trying to see not puff reports from beat camps, but trying to really hear what are the depth charts looking like? Because there's a lot of situations where this could be good, but we're not for sure. There might be a lot of competition. We're not sure how the snaps will all break out. And then we get to preseason, and it's really only the tip of the iceberg, because some teams don't use it at all. Sean McVay could care less. He did not let you know last year that Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams were going to be a thing. He intentionally smokescreened that whole thing, and no one knew that. The beat reporters knew that Puka Nacua was looking good at camp, and they were on that. So you have to give them credit. But also, then, every other year there's what was the year before? McCutcheon was the guy that's now with the Jets or whatever. He had the same publicity, but it didn't work. So it's nice when we can see it in the preseason. But again, it's only the tip of the iceberg, because these coaches, a lot of them with all the joint practices and everything, they can simulate exactly everything they want to see from a player, right? They can say, hey, you guys give us this coverage. We want to see, can these players adapt? Can they run these route concepts? And they're checking all these boxes through practice. Now, I think preseason for a lot of these coaches, it still is about that, the unknown. Can they go into a game, kind of get punched in the mouth? You don't know for sure what's going to happen. And can the competitive juices come out? So I think it still matters, but it matters more for some coaches than others. And sometimes, Harmon, the people that rest, it's actually more important to know who didn't play than who did. And one final thing, that I'll say with preseason utilization, I actually went back and researched my takes for the last 2 years to say, okay, where did it lead us astray? Where did it help us? And what I want to say is, for the coaches that do play their starters, mostly focusing on when they were on the field with either the starting offensive line, so just those series, or with the quarterback, is what we want to do. Now, it's not going to tell you exactly, you probably don't need to care that the player had a 40% target share. That's never bad. But these are pretty vanilla defenses. Some defenses are different. But the main thing is we can start to figure out with those teams, at least for week 1, what the pecking order probably looks like. So that's most useful in cases where we're not quite sure or where we may have some concerns. Now, the one caveat I'll say is these things, you can get them right. And if the players don't seize the moment at the beginning of the year, things change. Like by week 4, it can all be different. But I think the best thing we can hope for is to use this information to say, okay, we have an approximation or a better approximation of how we think these depth charts are going to look for week 1 for the coaches that still value playing their starters in the preseason. But then once the season starts, as you know, we've got to adapt.
Yeah, so many good kind of jumping off points there. I'll start with the last one because you posted a thread on Twitter, maybe like at some point in the last few weeks, and I've mentioned it on the pod before, looking back at preseason utilization data and some of your takes from last year, and kind of saying like, yeah, the big takeaway is we can get the week 1 depth charts right, but this is a long season, baby. It doesn't feel like a long season. It feels like it goes by pretty quickly, but a lot can change in the next 17 weeks once these players get rolling here. 18 weeks. I mean, my God, week 18. How do I not know still that there is a week 18 in the NFL season? The next 18 weeks, a lot can change. So, yeah, like I think Ben Gretsch on the pod about a month ago said, we don't win our league by getting the week 1 depth charts right. There's a long way to go after that, but it's a really good takeaway of where these players stand. I mean, and your point about who plays and who doesn't is also well taken. I mean, don't worry. Your boy has definitely been noting Rashad Bateman never playing in the preseason. That is a good thing for Rashad Bateman, but still, it just depends. Every team is different. Every player is different. Were there any before we go into this preseason and some of those takeaways, are there any kind of glaring examples from maybe last year that the preseason utilization data maybe, again, gave us that clue of where the player stood, but it didn't play out over the course of the whole season that you can think of from last year?
Yeah, so a great example was Travis Etienne. The early preseason data told us, oh my God, this guy just might have a 70% snap share. He did for 6 or 7 weeks, and then they were kind of like, maybe we should lighten the workload. This isn't going as well for Etienne. Now they had 7 or 8, I think, offensive linemen play 150 snaps or more. So they had offensive line problems too, and Etienne's efficiency came down. But again, the players got to respond. A great one on the wide receiver front was Elijah Moore. He was the top targeted player, was playing all the time, getting honestly schemed looks like Deebo Samuel. I know the quote unquote Deebo Samuel role. It'd be helpful if you're Deebo Samuel, right? It helps if you're going to be in the Deebo Samuel role, if you're actually Deebo Samuel. But Elijah Moore, he's an athlete, and looking at those first 4 weeks before, or can't remember how many weeks for sure, but before Deshaun Watson got hurt, he was the number 1 target earner on the Browns over that stretch, outpacing Amari Cooper, was playing all the time. Guess what? He didn't play well. So he eventually just got phased out of the offense. So those are great examples, but I still think it matters because at least in those cases, Matt, we know really early in the season, okay, well, they had their chance and they didn't do anything with it. It's better than, man, they didn't get their chance. Maybe I should hang on to them to see if they do get their chance. I'd rather just know. And I think that's the key. You really want to target. So going back to what Ben Gretsch said, the best mixes are when we get a young, talented player that could potentially be rising, and we suddenly know they're probably going to have an opportunity to flash right out of the gate, because those are the types of players that on your waiver wire, they're going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? Or if you don't have the top spot, you're not getting them. So I really try to focus on those type of players. I still give all the context around your Tim Patricks and guys that are complete surprises. Like, he's probably a starting wide receiver for the Broncos. Do we care that much for fantasy football? Like, probably not. Like, if you're in a 20-man league that starts 4 wide receivers, like Tim Patrick probably sounds pretty good, in your last couple of rounds. But in most leagues that people play in, it's like, fine, we'll pick him up if he does good and he just blows us away.
That Elijah Moore point is a really good one too, because that was a new player with a new team, and I think they were trying to use him in a role that honestly I didn't even like. When they're using him in the preseason, people are like, "Oh man, he's getting all these schemed up touches." Like, this is not really what you want this guy to be doing, anyways. Like you said, he's a small guy in Deebo Samuel's role. That he's more of like a route runner. That didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So. But you see him getting that usage, and that seems to be a good signal. But again, the longer that they tried to do that, the returns were not very good on that use of the player, so they moved away from it. And that can happen a lot when it's a new player with a new team. So every situation, it's important to take in the whole context of what we knew before, what we saw in preseason, and kind of like the balance between the two, especially when you're projecting going forward.
the last little tidbit I'll give to people, because like if you go over to Fantasy Life and check it out, it's all free. Just go, you guys can go read it, read what you want. I've got a summary of the top 10 from the last week. I've got one for every week that's up, but I look at the preseason starters throughout these articles. So you'll find some stuff in last week's article. We'll have to make sure we'll hit on Nico Collins before we end, Harmon, because I know you're a Nico Collins guy. So I got some good news for you on that one. But the one thing I'll say, the running backs, man. So what happens is their preseason utilization gets inflated. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because a lot of times in the preseason, you might see 2 or 3 series. That's a lot, honestly, guys, for the starters to play. 2 to 3 drives is it. And then they'll come off the field. Now, they might do that again the next week. But like this week, this year, a great example is Tennessee. So the Titans, if you look at it at a glance, you're like, oh, with the starters, man, Tony Pollard, 59% or 57% snap share. You know, he got 50% of the rushing attempts. He's out there 50% of the route participation. So someone might think, oh, yeah, he's the clear leader over Tajay Spears. Well, when you really go dig into it, he played the first drive in 2 games where they played their starters, 2 series. He got the first drive in both games. Tajay Spears got the second drive in both games. Guess what? Tony Pollard's drives just happened to be longer than the ones that Tajay Spears got. So while you might give him a slight lean because he got the first drive and Spears got the second drive, like really, it's going to be a tight race between those 2 guys, and you could easily see it flip-flop. So people can get it twisted. The one other thing with running backs, if you think about it in the regular season, what's the drive you usually see the backup come in and give a breather? It's usually the 3rd or 4th drive in the game. Well, by the time you're getting to that drive in the game, the starters are already off the field. And then you'll see the second string running back go in with the backups, and everybody's like, whoa, this guy's going to have an 80% snap share. No, he's not. They just pull. It just looks that way because they only played the starters for such a little amount of time. It can inflate running back utilization. So that's something to be aware of.
Well, let's just transition right into the Titans, because that was one of the first 3 teams I wanted to talk about here, which are weirdly all AFC South teams. I wanted to focus on this running back rotation. One, because I just think anecdotally, Tony Pollard has looked pretty good this preseason. Like, you know, obviously
he has.
Utilization data is one thing, but I think it's just fascinating when watching some of these games. He has stood out. He has been a more explosive player, I think, in these preseason games than he was for the vast majority of last season with the Dallas Cowboys. And I always come back to the conversation I had with Tony Pollard in February at the Super Bowl, where he said it wasn't until later in the season, he said week 11, I believe, against the Carolina Panthers, that he felt more like his old self. Now, it's worth noting that he still didn't have these, it wasn't as if like, oh man, he was just a monster after that. There were still some not great performances for Tony Pollard with the Dallas Cowboys, but still, just you think about injuries and how the body works. The longer he gets away from that San Francisco 49ers playoff injury the year prior, maybe he can still continue to rise and feel better. So I understand why that makes sense. He's just been a player for me that I haven't given honestly much thought about in the offseason, Dwain, because it's a team I'm not 100% sure how it's going to go. It's a muddled running back committee. Tajay Spears, I think he flashed last year. He was generally fits like the archetype of back that I'd like to invest in going into his second season, but then the Pollard wrench gets thrown in free agency. So really this has been honestly a backfield rotation, Dwain. When other people want to talk about it on the podcast in previous episodes, I'm like, all right, sure. Like, you got a Titans running back take, like, go for it. You got a strong feeling, go for it. But now that we have some preseason utilization data for these two, and particularly the fact that Pollard looks good in the preseason, where do we stand on these Titans running backs heading into the year?
Yeah, so I think they are very close. I think if we want to piece together all the parts to this, what do we hear throughout the offseason once they signed Tony Pollard? They continue to also talk up Tajay Spears. They also continue to talk about these players as being interchangeable, that they can both play on pass downs. They both give you that explosive upside in the run game. They're going to come out and run more 11 personnel than they ever did under Mike Vrabel. They're not going to be like the league leaders, but it's going to be a lot more than what we've seen in the past. They're going to try to spread things out. They're not going to try to use all these condensed formations, and that can work for some of these smaller backs. So I think they are the fit that they're looking for. I do agree. Pollard has looked much better. That's one thing that I'm always doing whenever I'm going through this data. It's kind of easy in the preseason because the starters don't play long. So, I mean, I watch, most of the starter
Not a
reps.
time-consuming activity.
Yes, not as time-consuming as it is in the season where you're like, good God, the fourth quarter on some of these games. But looking at Pollard, I agree. Like, some of that explosiveness looks like it's back. But I will say, He's had much better blocking than Tajay Spears. If you go back and watch that week 1 game, you see like Tajay Spears like inside the 5-yard line, man, he makes an awesome cutback to score a touchdown. And then I see everybody this weekend, Tony Pollard came in and stole the carry inside the 5. Guys, just weird stuff happens. Let's not overreact. I think they're going to use both guys inside the 5. It would be nice, if they settled on one, because then we could decide, okay, like this guy's actually more valuable in fantasy football. But if you think about it, Spears got that carry, in week 1 when they used the starters. They may have just wanted to see Tony Pollard get that carry in this game. So he came in and subbed for him. But I think you have to be really careful, like overreacting to those things. But I do think a big takeaway is both players have looked good. Spears doesn't look as good on paper because the blocking has not been as good for him. He's had guys in the backfield quite a bit. Pollard's had a couple of real nice runways that he's been able to take off. Now, to your point, the good news is, he had the acceleration. He had that burst that he actually just blew right past the second level defender and was immediately on the secondary, right? And making them have to make the tackle, which is kind of what we got. That's what we had been used to seeing from Pollard before the injury, with the 49ers. So I think they're both guys that you should be looking at. And again, chaos happens when week 1 gets here, man. We don't want anybody to get hurt, but either one of these players go down, you're suddenly looking at somebody that's probably, pushing high-end running back 2 status. And if they play good enough, we could suddenly think, okay, they're a low-end running back 1. I will say the final thing, man, I like the way they're using these guys in the pass game. A lot of design looks, especially to Pollard so far this preseason. You don't have DeAndre Hopkins out there, only one real target earner in Calvin Ridley, so that can change the dynamics once you get D-Hop back. Sounds like he'll be there week 1. But they do seem like they're potentially going to let those running backs kind of be the quote-unquote third option in the passing game. Tyler Boyd, obviously in the slot. Chig Okonkwo, like a 70% reputation from tight end. But I think that it's probably Ridley and Hopkins, and then the backs. So that's an added value when you have guys splitting time, especially in a PPR league.
Well, that clicked with me immediately when they signed Pollard and, Spears is already on the roster. I'm like, these guys are both players you'd probably want to throw the ball to. And that's just generally been my thought about this Titans coaching staff is they're going to emphasize the pass game much more than the Mike Vrabel contingent over the last few years. This is a team that I think is going to want to be more pass friendly than the old Titans. This has just been another layer of confirmation of that. So it's definitely good for fantasy for these guys. I think it's also going to create some layup throws for Will Levis, who maybe needs a little incentivization to get, hey, let's get these layups involved here, Will. And they don't have a Wan'Dale Robinson type of player who he played with at Kentucky, did Will Levis. This kind of allows them to have that guy, which
Chig's
I think
kind of been that guy. But I think these guys are probably the better playmakers that you can focus on.
100%. And I think they could be just involved in the pass game more than some of the ancillary Titans receivers, which is for the best. We know who most of these guys are. I think Spears and Pollard, there's still something to mine there. So overall takeaway, Pollard was somebody I was kind of drafting around, just never really finding my way to taking him in drafts. But the last few weeks, I've maybe moved him up a little bit to okay, he's here. I will take him because I think on the theme of getting the week 1 depth chart right, I think we could probably say Pollard is the slight 1A of this backfield, but it's a long season, baby. Spears goes down. He could be a clear RB1 on this team. Pollard takes a step back. Spears looks really good. A lot of things can happen here, but I think we have a little bit more clarity on these Titans backs than maybe we did a couple of weeks ago. Let's stick in the AFC South, Dwain. Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts, who I was going to make the headline here because Anthony Richardson played the first 5 drives in week 3. I would say mixed bag performance overall. Some, like I said, I've been unplugged a little bit the last few weeks, but, checking in on Twitter every now and again, the hyper analyzation of everything Anthony Richardson does makes me think 2 things. 1, my God, do we need the real games to get here? And 2,
we do.
It's going to be a long year of just a lot of Anthony Richardson talk. So that should be interesting. But just what was your reaction beyond everyone's big reaction on social media to what we saw from Anthony Richardson and the way that Colts offense flowed?
My big reaction to everyone's big reaction is, what the hell did everyone expect?
This
is Anthony Richardson's MO. I mean, we have all been watching the same player, right? We did all watch the same college film. Then we watched, I know we didn't get a lot last year, but that means you should have all watched him. So you know what he is.
Again, not a time-consuming activity, people.
It was not. Unfortunately, no, it wasn't. And the thing is, when you look at Richardson and where he goes in drafts, we've all already acknowledged this. This is why he goes 2 to 3 rounds after Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. He has the same rushing upside, maybe even higher than those 2 guys. but we don't know what he's going to be as far as a passer. And we're assuming it's probably not going to be good. I mean, I've got him projected for like 3,300 yards and playing 16 games. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to be a great passer. Now, could he surprise us? And if he does, like that would suddenly unlock, this quarterback 1 overall, upside. But I think we just need to be realistic. Why are we double counting this? We already knew this. I was in a draft that night, Harmon, a $300 draft. Me and Mr. Ian Harditz, we were drafting, and Anthony Richardson was falling like a rock. We drafted him in round 8. We hadn't taken a quarterback. We didn't go elite quarterback in the draft. We're like, okay, thank you, fantasy gods. Like, we all knew Anthony Richardson was not going to be an elite passer. Come on.
Of course, like this is going to be a work in progress. At best,
he did make good throws too, by the way. Like, I mean, 100%,
and which was the case when he played last year.
Yes.
Like there was some
polarizing.
He is not a consistently accurate player. Will he become a consistently accurate player? Maybe. I think generally the league and quarterback coaches have a more progressive and open-minded view of accuracy than they did 10 years ago. And I think a lot of that is Josh Allen. I also think some of that is Pat Mahomes, where he is a more accurate player. Jalen Hurts. All of these guys are more accurate right now than they were in college. And I think, and for Josh Allen, like the first few years of his career, the first few times we saw Jalen Hurts, Mahomes is hard to compare to anybody, and I shouldn't even just bring up his name, but you get the point. Like we can evolve as how accurate these guys are and everything, but we don't know that that's going to happen. We don't know that Anthony Richardson is going to do that. That's why he kind of goes in this middle ground of the QB1s where, if he hits, he's going to hit really big. But even if he doesn't hit as a passer, he's still going to give you fantasy value. Like that's just the reality of who he is as a player.
We've seen 21 quarterbacks since 2011 have at least 100 rushing attempts and not reach 3,500 yards passing. So basically they weren't good as passers.
Right.
They finished on average as the QB8. I mean, if you run as much as Anthony, guys, you've seen Taysom Hill play, right? Some of you remember Tim Tebow. Yeah. These guys were top 10 quarterbacks in points per game when they get on the field. Anthony Richardson's a better quarterback than either one of those. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Exactly. And one of the reasons that I have been, again, open-minded to the idea that Richardson could surprise us as a passer. And again, so the bar is low because he's not been a great, from a production standpoint, from a consistent accuracy standpoint, he's just not been a great passer so far. But one of the reasons I've thought that he could surprise us is that I like the ecosystem that he is in. I like Michael Pittman. I like Josh Downs when he's healthy. Shane Steichen, I think, is one of the top 5 play callers in the league. They have an offensive line that surprised us last year. And this offseason, they drafted a guy named Adonai Mitchell, who is, I just thought he was the perfect player to drop into that receiver core for multiple reasons. He's a guy, Dwain, that you highlighted in your week 3 preseason recap as kind of like potentially a stock up guy. You wrote that Adonai Mitchell garnered an 86% route participation rate, 22% target share, and 21% air yard share with Richardson this preseason. And what I think has been really interesting about him, Dwain, is that he has moved into the slot a little bit with Josh Downs out. But in 2 receiver sets, you noted this as well, he's bumped Alec Pierce to the bench, which I think was always going to happen. That part I totally get. But the fact that they view Richardson, the Indianapolis Colts view Richardson as a guy who's not just this George Pickens perimeter X receiver, running goes and curls and corner routes and stuff, that I think is really encouraging if you're looking at him as an upside flyer late in drafts.
Absolutely. Like, so when you look at Mitchell, it's encouraging anytime a team is willing to move someone around the formation. That means they're grasping the playbook. And it also means that the coaches, right, are doing a good job of balancing things out so that the player can expand and do the things, right, that are going to make them successful on the field. I think some coaches are guilty, and Andy Reid can even do this. Like, he'll go in and throw the whole playbook at some of these guys. And it's like, hey, learn every position. And they're like, whoa, and they just drown right away. Now some of them get it and they figure it out. And that's kind of Reid's style. We're not going to question Andy Reid, a great freaking schemer, right? And he's got Patrick Mahomes. Like, we just love that whole offense. But I'm with you on Shane Steichen. I really like this. I think it's also nice to see, like, if you get Adonai Mitchell, even just for some plays in the slot, getting potential mismatches with linebackers and safeties, having to deal with this man and his speed and his athleticism and his size, it's going to be problematic for defenses. So I think once you get Josh Downs back, though, and he primarily becomes your slot guy, and to your point, if AD Mitchell can be more than someone just running these go routes, and you can be working him in route concepts in combination with either Pittman or Josh Downs, because they really don't have tight ends that they're going to prioritize. You know, they don't really prioritize the backs in the passing game. So I think a lot of it's going to go through these three guys. I think that there's a lot of upside here. And my argument is like, look, guys, why are we taking him so much later than Ladd McConkey? Okay. We know Justin Herbert's a better quarterback than Anthony Richardson right now. We're no debating that, but it is Jim Harbaugh. It is a situation where we know they might run the ball as much as any team that doesn't have a scrambling quarterback. Scrambling quarterbacks are always going to bring those teams even further down in the passes because dropbacks turn into scrambles, right? That's going to happen with the Colts. But when you look at the Chargers for not having a scramble quarterback, it won't surprise me. Like if they're in the bottom 10 in pass attempts. Maybe it won't be as some extreme as what some people say, but the Chargers passing attempts are coming down. And Ladd McConkey hasn't been playing in 2 wide receiver sets this preseason. Now that doesn't mean that's a lock, but they like bigger wide receivers on the field to block in the run game. Well, what does Ladd McConkey not have? Size. So my only point is like, look, I could easily see a scenario here where AD Mitchell outscores Ladd McConkey this year, and this guy's going 4 or 5 rounds later in fantasy drafts. I moved him up inside my top 120 this weekend after just reviewing everything for the preseason with Mitchell. He's the kind of upside swing I want to take. We don't know what's going to happen for the season, but I feel really good that I get a player with upside that's going to be on the field week 1, 2, and 3, and I get to find out what they're worth. And if I hit, great. If I don't, I still made the right kind of swing to try to get that upside onto my team.
Yeah, and most importantly, at least in my opinion, most importantly to this Ladd McConkey, AD Mitchell comparison that you're making here, I had these guys graded and ranked in the same tier as prospects. Like it's not as if that, and I think McConkey was more discussed maybe and probably more.
He's the better route runner of the two, but yeah.
But like I think he's the better route runner. I think he was a cleaner prospect from a film evaluation standpoint. But I really liked AD Mitchell. I thought he had the skills to definitely win out as a perimeter receiver at the X. Ceiling skills, but also like, you know, when he first was starting to get slot receiver reps, I had a lot of people ask me, well, you know, does that really make sense? And the whole thing is like, you definitely saw him mostly only do X receiver stuff last year at Texas, which is why I think like his, you know, per route metrics, his, you know, team context metrics were lower because he was playing with a volatile quarterback and he was mostly running vertical routes as an X receiver. But from a movement skills standpoint, I do think he can win those one-on-one slot receiver matchups in a way that, like, I'm not saying AD Mitchell's going to become CeeDee Lamb, but in a similar way to CeeDee Lamb that, yeah, CeeDee Lamb's a better man press coverage beater than the vast majority of players that have his type of deployment. And that allows him to have these, you know, just layup catches for Dak Prescott. I mean, fewer connections were more electric than Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb on slant routes from the slot, especially against these man coverage looks. And I think that Colts can maybe see that in a similar way with AD Mitchell. And all of this comes back to Anthony Richardson and like, how do we make this guy more consistently accurate? Give him guys that can separate and get open, which I do think AD Mitchell can. So he's definitely a player that I've given a bump up to. I'm still a huge Josh Downs guy. Another player that I graded in this same tier as prospects.
I like Downs too.
Yeah, like it's a really interesting offense, which is why I think
people sometimes get twisted though. Like they'll be like, well, how can they all succeed? We're not saying they're all going to succeed. It might only be one or two guys. We don't have these guys
all ranked as top 30 players.
Exactly. And the point being is that sometimes we just have to have a little humility and be willing to mix up like which one we would draft. Like it might be Josh Downs that hits. It might be AD Mitchell that hits. It might be those two guys that hit and Michael Pittman takes a step back. We really don't know for sure how it's going to work out. But what we do know is we like both Josh Downs and AD Mitchell, and we think they're going to get playing time early in the season. And right now, AD Mitchell's the healthier guy. So I think he has the better shot week 1 to shoot out of a cannon, whereas Josh Downs is probably still going to be like 80, 90% coming back from a high ankle sprain. So when that stuff all gets mixed together, I'm like, okay, I'm going to lean to AD Mitchell. Doesn't mean I like him more than Josh Downs like long term, but if I'm just trying to figure out what's going on and have one guy that might be a shooting star out of the gate, I think AD Mitchell's like the chip that I placed down.
Yeah. I'm a sicko, and I will definitely be dialed into that Colts week 1 game against the Texans, trying to just see what this offense with Anthony Richardson looks like. Let's take another little view of the AFC South here and talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Talk about a rookie who I think I always had, I know I always had ranked ahead of consensus, and I think other people have kind of come up on Brian Thomas Jr. here with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, from your utilization article, you noted the deployment for Brian Thomas with Trevor Lawrence on the field. Brian Thomas finishes the preseason with an 81% route participation rate with Trevor Lawrence. You also noted, by the way, and I loved your blurb on this, just Gabe Davis hasn't left the field with Trevor Lawrence's preseason, which not surprising, and also not really sure we should care because we know who Gabe Davis is. But Thomas is a guy that I think he just fits perfectly into sort of the upside of the unknown in this receiver room. So again, you can feel free to disagree with me on this. I always had Brian Thomas ranked a little bit ahead of consensus, a guy that I really liked drafting in the mid rounds. Preseason usage on him, has he changed your stance on him at all? Kind of changed your mind, or were you always kind of in on Brian Thomas?
I was always in, but the utilization just continues to make me more bullish. Like, I think he probably ends up around 85-90% route participation. When you think about Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk and the way they get deployed, like Ingram's basically running the underneath stuff. So when you get all this zone coverage, he's running the drag routes and all that, athletic tight end. Then they're working in behind him with Christian Kirk, more of a vertical slot guy, a lot of in-breaking routes. And then when you think about what Thomas can do, his biggest question mark, like on film in college and like in his data, was like his work in the intermediate area of the field. But he's another one of those guys, had plenty of short stuff. And I felt like he had the body movement that you're talking about. Like he could still sink the hips, do a lot of the things. He just wasn't asked to do all those things in college. But when I look at it and I think about those two guys, I'm like, we know what Gabe Davis is. He's going to go out there and run gassers and mostly not be open. But the guy that could truly uncork this offense, if they truly want to give Trevor Lawrence this chance to get things finally going, it is Brian Thomas Jr. He is the one that could be the straw that stirs the drink. And with defenses early in the season, probably focusing on those other two, I think we could see a super hot start. Like, would you be surprised if week 1, it's like Brian Thomas, 5 targets, 4 catches, 80 yards and a T? Like that feels like an easy week 1 stat line. And then it's just like potentially up from there. So yeah, I absolutely love him. I've been drafting him. I just keep taking him sooner and sooner and sooner. I feel great about him.
Yeah, I'm at a point right now where I would just straight up rather have Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk, like regardless of ADP. Even
I don't take Christian Kirk. I let him go. So I can just take Brian Thomas.
Yeah, I don't think I've clicked Kirk once this offseason. He's generally just been a guy I've been lower than consensus on. Because a lot of it is I just think that Brian Thomas is going to bring a lot to this offense. Current Yahoo ADP, Brian Thomas is 90th overall, wide receiver 40. I'm taking him there pretty much every single time because they're just not. Yeah, there are not many better ceiling bets in that range. So, yeah, I think we're on the same page here, Dwain. We already liked this player. We like just how he fits in this offense. And preseason has been a bit of a confirmation to that idea. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to highlight 3 situations that, at least for me, I'm kind of definitely ready to change my mind on, or at least want to question my priors right after this. All right, we're back. Something I'm definitely ready to change my mind on is the Patriots quarterback situation, Dwain. And this is classic offseason. So let's just paint the picture. All offseason, at least me, I'm not going to say you, but at least me, and I think a lot of other football people that I pay attention to and listen to have just said, man, Jacoby Brissett is the best bridge quarterback you could probably think of. He's played well in chaotic environments. He's played well in clean environments over the last couple of years. Great bridge quarterback. They can just play him, let him take the lumps, and get Drake Maye some experience on the bench, some growth, some development. They don't have to throw him out there to the Wolves early on. And that sounds perfect. Like in an ideal world, right? Guy like Drake Maye, people say he needs to sit. You got a bridge quarterback who can allow him to sit. Great. Perfect. Rosy offseason picture. Then you see these two guys on the field. And like, again, I still like Jacoby Brissett, but I think it's been a rocky road this preseason. And look, that it's preseason. Okay, that's not everything. Like I said, I still like Jacoby Brissett. This is less about him and more about you see Drake Maye out there. And again, preseason, vanilla defenses, the whole thing, whatever. I'm not even going to say it's going to be perfect, and it hasn't been perfect with Drake Maye out there, but he just gives the offense life. And you're suddenly like, why don't we just throw this guy out there and see what happens? So again, that's sort of my journey with the Patriots quarterback situation. And I think the preseason Dwain has sort of moved my opinion on what the Patriots should do with their quarterbacks early in the season, at least.
Yeah. And so like from a fantasy perspective, we definitely want Drake Maye on the field. He's the only guy that can honestly uncork anything in this offense right now. Nothing meant towards Jacoby Brissett, but it's looked terrible. Now the coaching staff, they watch the practice every day and they continue to say that Jacoby looks like the better player. The problem is your offensive line is terrible. And Jacoby Brissett at this point in his career is a statue. And what we've seen with Drake Maye, even though he may not be able to understand what all of these exotic looks will be once the real season starts, probably more likely just to go out there and throw a pick six right away when he gets some of this stuff mixed with pressure. But he's been able to handle the pressure. He's been able to use his mobility and escapability, if you will, to maneuver in the pocket, buy time to hit big plays down the field. He had another one this weekend that got called back due to penalty. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people didn't even see that play. So he has shown that, and he is good on the ground. So if he does escape the pocket and there's not someone to get the ball to, which let's be honest, is probably going to be the case a lot with this receiving core this season, he can at least scramble and he can at least maybe pick you up a first down, and get 6-7 yards and get out of bounds and get you that first. If you look at, his college data, he was behind only Jaden Daniel in design rush attempts and scramble rate in college. So this is a guy that you can use to also at least make the defense have to defend a potential, option play, where he can decide, is he going to keep it or is he going to hand it off up the middle? And I think that anything you can do like that when you've got an offense that honestly is just so weapon starved, like the Patriots, I think that's what you need to do. I do understand the sentiment that, is he going to get David Carr? If some of you don't know David Carr, he's Derek Carr's older brother. Fresno State quarterback. He came to the Houston Texans when they were an expansion team, was thought to be one of the best prospects, in a while. And he was the first overall pick. And he got obliterated as a rookie because they were an expansion team. They didn't have an offensive line, They were literally picking over from the leftovers of the rest of the league that people had to expose off their roster. And so maybe there's that concern. But here's my challenge with that, Harmon. You know what's going to happen in New England. Come week 4, they're 0-4. The fans are going to be foaming at the mouth for Drake Maye, and it doesn't matter what your plans were to start this season. You're going to get forced to start him sooner rather than later anyway. So unless you're really going to have the resolve, right, the intestinal fortitude to say, we're not listening to that, and we're sitting Drake Maye all season because we don't want him to die, just start him. Just start him out of the gate.
And I believe that in practices, Jacoby Brissett looks better. When we're not really pressuring the quarterback, we're certainly not hitting the quarterback. But then you get against still vanilla, but live defenses in the preseason. And I always come back to the quote that Sigmund Bloom had with Andrew Luck in his rookie season. He always said he looked like a guy that was dropped behind enemy lines and just like, okay, shoot your way out. I do think Drake Maye is going to be dropped in a lot of those behind enemy line situations and having to shoot his way out. The thing is, though, he can do it. Like you see him doing it in the preseason. He can at least do it. It's gonna be a tough fight. There's no question about that. But he can actually get it. He has the tools at least to get it done. And for an offense that is so weapon starved, for an offense that's not going to be able to protect, that's probably going to be in some not advantageous situations because of where they are as a team, I think having a guy like Drake Maye with those tools gives them a little bit of a better shot just to create things on offense that are not going to be there from a play design standpoint, number one, and number two, certainly not from like a player execution standpoint. But before we move on from the Patriots here, I agree with you. Drake Maye would become an interesting fantasy quarterback because of the mobility if he hits the field. But is there anyone else in this receiver room that sort of stands out as like, okay, well, if this offense is going to be more interesting under Drake Maye, do we care about any of these receivers?
Yeah, I think the ghost of Bill Belichick is still hanging around or something, because we've got KJ Osborne and Tyquan Thornton still getting the first drive. Who are we kidding? We know who these players are, guys. They're not going to be the guys that are going to carry your offense anyway. You're going to need to let Jalen, and I don't know that Jalen Polk's going to be good, but you need to find out. You need to go ahead and put him on the field. You need to let Javon Baker get out there. Demario Douglas will play the slot. I think he's going to get his targets, right? It's a matter of, can he stay healthy? Can he come up with many touchdowns, long plays? I don't know. I like him fine in a PPR, full PPR. But I really think Polk and Javon Baker, one of those guys, have to step up because we know what all these other dudes are. They're not good enough to go out and earn targets on their own. They're guys you might be able to scheme up for a little bit, but for the most part, you can't constantly be having to do that to try to get players open. They've got to be able to go out and win some on their own, and at least your young players give you a chance. I will say on a positive note, Polk rotated in on the second drive, and the starters played the first 6 drives. The offensive line is what I looked at because Brissett got knocked out in the middle of the second drive.
Yeah, right.
And it was Drake Maye from there. I mean, he got obliterated. It was almost, that's the closest thing I could see to like a clothesline, like in the middle of a WWE match. I mean, and he was on the mat. Gerard Mayo said he could have come back. Like, dude, you're an absolute gladiator, Jacoby Brissett. If you could have come back in a game from that hit, it was brutal. But they got to get the young guys involved. I am interested in your thoughts, like on that. Have you seen anything with Polk or Baker? I've heard of some of what you said, but I'll just give the floor to you on those two guys. And if you were to pick one to potentially emerge maybe in a few weeks, once the season kind of gets rolling and they're finally like, whatever, we're not starting KJ Osborne because that day's coming.
Yeah, it would be Polk.
Okay.
I think those guys, again, they were in the same tier as prospects to me. I say that a lot, which is Polk went in the right place, I think, in the draft. I think Baker went too late. Now, I think Baker... I've seen people say, again, just casually looking at stuff like, oh, well, this is a bad sign for Javon Baker because he's, Tyquan Thornton's going to start over him. If that's still the case, and by week, 17, 18, whatever, maybe then we can have that conversation.
Is that possible?
You can print out the YouTube thumbnail and eat that if that's the case. Okay. We'll go with that. But yeah, I would be stunned, and then that would maybe be a bad signal for old Javon Baker. But he's definitely someone I'm keeping kind of another football guy's quote. I'm keeping him on waiver wire speed dial at least with Javon Baker. But
he's the one that could be the straw to stir the drink.
Totally, because he stands out. He
can be a big play guy.
He's one of these things doesn't look like the other, even when we're talking about the rest of the receiver room. So that's why I've been interested in him. That's why I was interested in him both in the draft and then especially when the Patriots took him. But Polk, I do think, is a good player, and I think will have a week 1 role and probably a bigger and bigger role by week 3, week 4, week 5, etc. He's somebody I've been willing to take late in drafts. I don't really take Baker, at least in a typical redraft league, but again, waiver wire speed dial.
He's waiver
for him. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Russell Wilson, I think we just very, very briefly, because this is a thing I think people would miss in preseason, Dwain. Pat Freiermuth goes in kind of that range of the drafts where it's like, okay, I didn't take a tight end early, but Freiermuth's pretty solid. I'll go ahead and take him as back end tight end 1 and expect like usable production. At different points in the offseason, I was a guy doing that. Don't love what we've seen in the preseason where Pat Freiermuth, as you wrote in your article, he posted a 50% route participation in week 3. He now sits at 60% for the preseason with Russell Wilson on the field. And that is one thing we've definitely gotten from preseason. Justin Fields is still Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson is at least going to start the season and probably have I would say a decent leash in the first month of the year at least. But again, so that it's important that Pat Freiermuth with Russell Wilson on the field, 60% route participation for the preseason. Darnell Washington played 100% of the snaps with Russell Wilson in week 3. That I actually kind of saw coming, but I didn't know that
Smith
Freiermuth
loves this guy.
And of course, bro,
he's a mauling blocker. He's a mauling blocker. Of course,
Arthur Smith is going to like this guy because 1, he's a mauling blocker. 2, I still am interested in Darnell Washington. If hey, you just have him run a route out in the flat. Nobody's going to be covering him. He's massive. You throw him the ball and he can break some tackles out there. So I guarantee you Arthur Smith probably walked into the interview with Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers like, man, I got some plays. Boys, I got some plays. I got some plays. Yeah, Freiermuth, I'll figure that out. George Pickens, I'll figure that out. But this guy, Washington, I've got some plans and some plays for this guy. So that wasn't surprising me. But the downstream effect is that Freiermuth is a guy that I think has become a little bit of a shakier bet at tight end.
Yeah, so I also write a summary. If you guys, Matt's talking about my total recap where I write up my notes for all the games, look at the data, I watch the film on the starters, but I also have my abbreviated version that's up on the site too. It's just the top 10 for the week, and I have the top 10 for the week before. You guys can check them out. But the title, number 4, is Freiermuth, and it just says GTFOH Pat Freiermuth. I'm done. I'm out. I mean, I'm not drafting him. There's just no point. We're already talking about an offense that at its best, we hope can throw for 225 yards per game. The only way something can be good in that kind of format is if you have a complete dominating player. So George Pickens could still end up being valuable because he's fallen so much on this Brandon Ayuk stuff. He could still end up being a value in fantasy drafts. But Pat Freiermuth, there's no way. If he's going to play 60% of the snaps, it's not going to work out. And again, the thing here is we're getting this signal in the preseason. We've heard it some from training camp, and it's also Arthur Smith's MO. So that's when these things all stack up, and you need to go ahead and put a stake in the ground and just say, I'm not taking, everyone say it with me, I'm not drafting Pat Freiermuth. There's no point. Life's too short for this, man. We don't need to do this. We have other things that we can be doing in our life, and I don't want to deal with it. I would take Taysom Hill straight up over him if he's eligible for tight end in your fantasy league. So the best thing
he is on Yahoo now. I believe he is on Yahoo now. So there we go.
I don't know why I'm fist bumping. I just wish all the sites were the same, so that I would know how to handle all these questions. But the big thing is we have Arthur Smith. He likes to mix up all these personnel packages, Matt. And you've seen it. We've seen it for years. 12 personnel. Pat Freiermuth's not getting out there. Nope. Want the big heavies. Want the big dogs out there for that. 21 personnel. You want your best blocking tight end on the field. Pat Freiermuth's not on the field for that. And then in 11 personnel, kind of the more obvious passing formation or formations out of 11 personnel. That's 3 wide receivers. Pat Freiermuth's only at 53% of the snaps. So if Pat Freiermuth was at 80% in 11 personnel, you might be like, oh, well, game scripts will force him to throw enough. Maybe I could see a way. But with this, no, man, there's no point in drafting Pat Freiermuth right now. And even if this all ends up being wrong and he plays 100% of the snaps in week 1, how concerned are we really that Pat Freiermuth is going to be the reason that we lost our fantasy league? Just, there's no point. There's no point in it.
Yeah, he was like a potential boring floor play at tight end.
Yes.
I can just get some points and get through this. But now, that floor has just been ripped out from under him.
Yeah.
Before we get to the mailbag portion of the podcast, Dwain, are there any other players that we need to discuss from preseason that I may have missed from your most recent articles?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things Nico Collins. I was a little torn. I've always loved Nico Collins. I loved him last year, but I wasn't sure what was going to happen because they rotated their wide receivers so much last year. But whenever you look at this utilization, with the preseason starters, and it's in my last week's utilization report because they didn't play their starters this past weekend. Nico Collins, man, 93% route participation. This dude was barely at 80% last year. And this is with the addition of Stephon Diggs, who was at 86%. Tank Dell was at 64%. So the way I look at this one now, I'm much more willing. Early in the offseason, I was kind of like, man, I really like Nico Collins, but I'm not so sure should he go 2 rounds ahead of the other guys because I don't know what I like the talent, not for sure what the coaches are going to do with this. But seeing this, at least I know the ceiling is there, and I feel good enough after they paid him and then seeing this that they do believe he's their number 1. Right. And I think they're going to treat him as such. Now, it may not be that spread apart. They may be closer than this, but at least I know that range of outcomes is there. So absolutely love Nico Collins. He falls into round 3 on Yahoo quite often. Yeah. That's a smash. Nico Collins in round 3, baby. Give me that all day long. The other one I would say would be going to, the Buccaneers, Bucky Irving, man. I moved him inside my top 150. He and, Tank Bigsby are 2 of my bigger movers, this preseason at running back. Bigsby's not in the top 150. He's just the clear backup again right now to Travis Etienne. But man, Bucky Irving looks good. He does the things this coaching staff wants. This coaching staff has been writing Rachaad White about, hey, man, be more decisive. Stop doing this Le'Veon Bell crap where you sit back there and wait around and invite a linebacker into the hole and then you bounce to the other one. And not to say those things can't work, but that's not what they want. They want a guy that's going to get downhill quick. You go watch Bucky Irving in college and then go watch him in this preseason. And guys, there was some good blocking against some second string defenses. I'm not going to lie, but the guy's reading the thing right and he's doing what he needs to do. He's got a nice burst. Immediately, people will tell you, though, Matt, how it goes, 192 pounds, man, ain't going to happen. And you're like, okay, Jamal Charles was 192, 194 when he entered the league, left it at 199. Austin Eckler was under, 195 pounds when he entered the league. He ended up being a full-time back at some point. So I think, and Kyron Williams last year, and no one cares about Kyron Williams being small this year. Achan last year. So, I mean, the league's changing. And so you need to
Totally.
be open to these type of players. So when I look at Bucky Irving, I think, one, something happens to Rachaad White. He is the clear-cut number 2. Chase Edmonds going to IR. But I think he could also be a sneaky bet to suddenly push for more work from Rachaad White if he doesn't do the things the coaches want. And there is a range of outcomes somewhere in there where they're like, you know what, Rachaad, like take a back seat. We're just going to give this guy more work. So I want to draft players that have a lot of outs like that. And I really like what I've seen from Bucky Irving.
Yeah, he is definitely a player I've risen on as well in the preseason. Bucky Irving, he's come up in my rankings. He's been a player I've been trying to take late in drafts now. And on the Nico Collins thing, yeah, that utilization is about what I expected. But again, that confirmation has not forced me to change my rankings, but just made me feel more confident in my ranking of Nico and where he goes. Yeah, I'm trying to take Nico Collins.
Yeah, because Nico does go next to some other players we really like Jalen Waddle. So, I mean, you have choices there. So it is nice to go ahead and get this confirmation. Like, the player's good, but just to get a little bit more to know, okay, I'm not going to be stuck probably in a complete 3-way committee between these receivers. They're going to go ahead and feature him on a down-to-down basis.
All right, let's take one final break and wrap with a couple of fantasy mailbag questions. All right, welcome back. We know for everyone listening to this pod that you are likely in some of your most important drafts, maybe right now, but certainly in the next probably few days, next week. We're here to help. So welcome to Fantasy Mailbag.
You've got mail.
When it comes, I want to well.
Goodbye.
First one comes in from Sean, who sent in this video.
What's up, Yahoo Mailbag? This is Sean in NorCal. I've been blessed with the number 1 pick in our 14-team PPR points per completion QB premium scoring league. If you have the number 1 pick, who are you going with? I'm thinking Mahomes because I think he'll have the most pass attempts this year. Thanks in advance.
Okay, Dwain. Love this because they did not send this in while they were driving, which, I mean, Andy
which
had
is apparently a problem for you guys.
Yes, apparently this is an issue. Please do not record videos while you are driving. Don't do that. Andy had a great thing on it a few episodes ago. Shout out to Andy for that. So appreciate that, Sean. That's great. Okay, so this is an interesting league format here, Dwain. Points per completion league, but it is 14 teams, full PPR. They're leaning Mahomes. What do you think?
Man, and it's not super flex or anything, but it's just points per completion. So you got to think, how many quarterbacks do you think are going by the time it gets back to this guy?
It's a great question.
See, here's the thing. People don't always adjust to these rules. And sometimes you think they're going to, and you make this bold pick like this, and then it gets back to you. Or they
over-adjust, And I think sometimes people, that's the thing is I think sometimes people over-adjust where, and this happens a lot with 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, which this is not that, but it's still the same kind of principle here is the quarterbacks are getting a scoring boost. And a lot of times, I mean, at least this is how I've always approached this. Like, yeah, Pat Mahomes is getting a 6-point passing touchdown boost, but so is everybody else. So, are we then overemphasizing the quarterback position?
Raw completions aren't really the differentiator for quarterbacks. It's the yards that they get from the completions, right? So you could honestly argue that this scoring rule actually helps some of the lesser quarterbacks, right? It's all relative, but
yeah, sure.
I struggle with these kind of things. Like, I like the bold take. If you told me that like quarterback passing yards were going to be for every 10, like a running back or a receiver, I would say Patrick Mahomes in a heartbeat. He is the favorite to throw for 5,000 yards. If you got to pick a guy, CJ Stroud would be second on my list.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm down with it, but I'm kind of contrarian. I would probably take something different and assume that my league mates, and I could be wrong, are not going to overreact to this, and I'm still getting something really good in round 2. But I hate to take someone off their dream, man. If you just love Patrick Mahomes, this is enough of a reason to take him number 1 if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. Last year, the top 2 quarterbacks in completions were Dak Prescott and Jared Goff. And
See?
I guarantee,
I'm telling you, it's not.
I guarantee you those 2 guys are not going. I don't know if they're both, especially because it's not a super flex. Only one quarterback's on every team. I think there's a good chance one or maybe both of those guys are still available to you when it comes back. on your next pick. So I'm not going with Mahomes here. I would just take your like you like McCaffrey number 1, you like a Breece Hall, you like one of the receivers. It's a full point PPR. I'd probably just still take McCaffrey number 1 because that's who I'd take number 1 and keep it moving. Okay.
Now it is 14 teams, so I did note that. So if they do all follow the trend, there's a chance you're sitting there and you're like, wow, 20 guys are gone, and I hate Matt Harmon and Dwain McFarland.
I mean, shoot, then you know what? Sam Howell was 4th in completions last year.
This is my point. Completions aren't the differentiator, man.
Tua it was 5th. Like somebody's making it back to you that's going to have a weird amount of completion. So I would try to hack the scoring in that way. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Tom sends in this voice memo. Let's hear it.
Is hero or zero RB strategy still viable? Wide receivers are seriously steamed up these days, and RB value has plummeted both in fantasy and real life. Does zero RB now put you at a considerable disadvantage when choosing a roster? Cheers. Thanks so much.
Dwain, zero RB, hero RB, still viable, or how do you approach the position in drafts?
Yeah, so I wrote a complete strategy article on this, studying all the ADPs from all the sites, including Yahoo. Yahoo got preferential treatment in that article, guys. That's actually who I built all the examples around, was for Yahoo. But hero is my favorite this year. But actually, in real managed drafts, the players that are falling too much right now are actually the wide receivers this season. So I'm good with going with a hero RB build. I'm not going zero unless you play in a league that's 3 starting wide receivers and like 2 flex, full PPR. And here's the key, guys. You know your league better than me. You know how the other managers in your league behave. If they love wide receivers and all these values we're seeing on all these different sites aren't going to be there, then fine, feel free to go zero. But I have built, I've simulated tons and tons of teams to try to come up with this strategy for this year based on where ADP is. I'm going hero, and I've actually recommended to people you can go with, believe it or not, 2 running backs to start your draft. And here's the reason why. You're getting Malik Neighbors in round 4, guys. You're getting Rashee Rice if you take him 2 rounds early in round 5. Rashee Rice is probably not serving a suspension, and they've not moved enough in these ranks. Yeah, you're telling me you play on underdog. News travels fast. I get it. A zero RB build is very viable on underdog, and I've drafted a lot of those. But in home leagues, man, my son, Matt, I gave him this strategy guideline. We had a little pre-talk for an hour. The dude came out in a full PPR, and he drafted Christian McCaffrey at the 101. He took Derrick Henry, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jalen Waddle came back to him. This is a 12-team league. Jalen Waddle comes back to him. He gets Malik Neighbors. Those are his 2 wide receivers and his flex. Has 2 running backs. Comes back, gets David Njoku and Tank Dell. And then still stacks on Rome Odunze to the end of this thing. Like, his wide receivers are loaded, and he got the 2 running backs. So what I see in most home leagues is running backs actually continue to go too early. So what I would rather do is grab 2 or 1 for sure that I like, because what I don't want to do is feel I've got to reach for Rachaad White in round 4. No, I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I like Joe Mixon. I don't want to take him in round 3 of a fantasy draft. I would rather take Kyron Williams in round 2 than have to take Joe Mixon in round 3. So I've been trying to avoid at all costs being in any kind of scenario where I would have to take a running back basically in rounds 4 through 6, because I don't like them unless their name is Kenneth Walker Jr. I do like him.
There we go. Honestly, I don't really have anything to add to that, because that is generally how I've been building teams as well, man. Real quick, the Chiefs signed Juju Smith-Schuster this morning?
Don't care.
I don't
Juju's
care
only
either.
27, man. Like, he's the new Amari Cooper.
He really is. Well, except
he's not. Well, sorry. I'll be nice. I'll just leave it unsaid.
We'll be nice here. I'm going to save this third mailbag question actually for tomorrow's show, because it's a Breece Hall question, and I want to hear Dalton Del Don's answer to it. So I'm going to save that one. But for now, that was great. Appreciate that. A lot of good insight there from Dwain, especially about the Rashee Rice thing. I think people could take that to heart heading into their drafts. And just the structure of the receiver position, man, is so interesting this year. It's fascinating. I agree with you that receiver value is still to be had. In
Nico in round 3.
Yeah, like these Yahoo ADPs, I definitely think you can still take a lot of advantage of falling receivers. And I'm with you. Like, if Rachaad White falls, I'm willing to take him, but only if he falls. And that's kind of the cliff at the running back position to me, where I don't want to be taking these next few guys. So we are generally building teams the same way, Dwain McFarland, and I think that's good for the listeners to hear. Reminder to all of you out there, the Fantasy Mailbag is open for business the rest of August. Be sure to submit your questions via voice memo or video to fantasymailbag@yahoosports.com. We're going to try to get to as many as possible here before week 1 kicks off. And on that note, week 1, as you know, is less than 2 weeks away. Alarmingly, it is rapidly approaching. And as you also know from my many, many ad reads, we've got a little thing going on with NBC Sports this year. If you sign up for a fantasy league on Yahoo Fantasy, you are going to be automatically entered to win $1 million. That is a lot of money, $1 million. If any of the players you start score a touchdown in the week 1 games on NBC and Peacock, you're going to earn bonus entries into the sweepstakes. The deadline is rapidly approaching, September 5th. So get in a league, draft some players from those games, and let's just see what happens. A lot of good players available in those week 1 games on NBC and Peacock. So let's get to it. That's going to do it for today. Dwain McFarland, appreciate you joining us. Let the people know where they can find your work as we, like I said, rapidly approach week 1.
Yeah, man. Head over to fantasylife.com. You've got work from myself, the great Ian Harditz. We've got Chris Allen. We've got a great team over there. If you like this utilization stuff, I do that all through the season. You have complete access to that article for free. You can check out all the preseason stuff. Of course, we've got rankings, tiers, all that stuff. That draft strategy that I mentioned, that's also not behind a paywall. It's completely free. And I've written out strategies for every position. So yeah, just go check it out over at fantasylife.com.
Love it, Dwain. You guys do excellent work there. You do excellent work. So definitely endorse everybody going to check it out. On Wednesday, this podcast continues Cram Week. Scott and Dalton are going to step into the host chairs, and they're going to share one fantasy item you need to know for all 32 teams. I am devastated to be missing an all 32 teams podcast, but like I said at the top, I'll be back fully in action going forward. From there, those guys are going to kill it. Appreciate all of you listening. Until then, we're out.